Wouldn't it be nice if game companies would make more copies of some of these older games, and not just some of them, like all of them? And hey, while we're at it, I got an idea. How about making some of those giant old Yellow Pages books again? Now that was living, sifting through seemingly endless pages like some kind of mad sorcerer looking up the exact spell that you need, only to find out that Sam's Boot Barn down on Market and 5th Street has gone out of business since the last Yellow Pages was printed. Oh well, easy solution to that, just print off another set of these massive books for the entire population. Now, if I'm being realistic, I'm perfectly willing to admit that not everybody would stand for something like the Yellow Pages books being brought back. For example, people in the doorstop business, they'd never stand for it. But you know what people would stand for? That's right, old games having newer copies of them produced in this day and age. In fact, not only would people stand for it, we'd jump up and shout, shake our arms all about, do the Macarena, you name it. When it comes to selling anything, the most obvious thing that you need is people who are willing to buy whatever it is. And when it comes to something like older video games, there is certainly no shortage of people willing to buy this stuff. I mean, if the average retro game collector is willing to give a whole bunch of money to eBay user Gamer Mongoose 927, then odds are they'd be willing to give even less money for the same game to a more official entity like Nintendo, Sega, Capcom, Konami, you name it. Now, I'm not gonna pretend to understand the ins and outs of what a giant business like one of those companies would have to think about in order to make something like that happen. I'm just here to say that there certainly is a demand for it. But demanding things is the easy part. I want this, I want that, I want a golden banana that doubles as a super soaker pistol. But who's gonna make that happen? Not me. That's somebody else's problem to figure out the ins and outs of getting it to market. Actually, you know, maybe it should just be regular yellow instead of gold. That way it can be more incognito. It's like, am I having a snack? Nope. I'm shooting you in the face with my water pistol. Now, by this point of the video, I'm sure a lot of you have been thinking, but a lot of these older games do get newer copies made of them, and that's true. I hear ya. That's absolutely wonderful. Companies like I Am 8-Bit, Limited Run, and some other ones will actually make some special edition re-releases of these older games, and they'll often even throw in some extra doodads and diddly bobs just to make it extra special. Naturally, given the choice of either having these releases or not having them, absolutely we want to have them. The problem is that a lot of times these releases will be of games that we really don't need more copies of them. I mean, sure, having more copies doesn't hurt, but I remember some of the first releases I saw like this were for games like Street Fighter 2, Mega Man 2, Mega Man X. Those are games that, yeah, they're great games, but there are so many other games that would be much more appreciated to have some copies released of them that cost so much right now to get old used copies, where it'd be nice to have a cheaper alternative. That being said, there are some games where companies have addressed this, making newer copies of older games that are really expensive to get on the secondhand market. And for that, I applaud them. And I guess I'm just here to say, let's get some more of that. Keep that going. In fact, as of the time of this video, there's a rumor that Snatcher for Sega CD is going to see such a release, and that would be amazing. And yet, some of you are probably still thinking, what is this guy complaining about? There's brand new copies of older games for pretty much every single game you could ever think of. Reproductions, which I don't know how you feel about those, but I think what everyone could agree on is that for the price those sell for, companies and the bigger companies could definitely sell us those same games, except that they're officially licensed releases. The problem is that when these game companies try to sell us older games, a lot of times they want us to buy them for their newest consoles, which makes sense. I mean, it's what they're currently trying to market and push. So that's just kind of how it goes. But the other thing is that a lot of these companies are moving away from even selling physical copies of their most brand new games they have. So for us to say, hey, can you make some physical copies of your really old games for us? They're like, what? No, we're going the opposite direction. Plus, I feel like if they actually did release physical copies of these older games, they'd also feel inclined to release the actual consoles themselves, just to make sure people can actually play the games. They can't just be counting on people to have this hardware that's decades old. And so at that point, it would basically just be like a full-blown console re-release, like we went back to 1991 or whenever the console had come out. And yeah, we can dream that would be pretty cool. I mean, just from a nostalgia perspective, if nothing else, but yeah, I think it's safe to say that's pretty unrealistic. Okay, but what about preservation? How does that tie into all of this? Some people would say that we need to keep making copies of these older games to make sure they're always going to be around. But the problem with that is that these games will eventually decay. Now, that being said, it sure doesn't seem like it's going to be anytime soon, as this cartridge is basically 30 years old, and yeah, it looks exactly the way it did the day it came out. What I would say, if you're concerned about the preservation of physical cartridges for years to come, is do not take your games with you to your grave. I know, believe me, I'm just as tempted as a lot of you are to bring some of my favorites into my grave with me. The problem is this: if you bring your games into your grave, it won't be able to be passed on to the younger generations. And two, you know how people bust into storage lockers looking for games? You're gonna have people popping open graves looking for retro games. I mean, I can just see it now. Game hunting at the graveyard. People popping open coffins with a crowbar to see what kind of Super Nintendo heavy hitters they can find. Someone's got a flashlight reading the gravestones. Hey, this one says NES Addict on it. There's bound to be some NES games in there. Pop it open. All that and more on this episode of The Grave Game Robbers. Alright, so in conclusion, don't expect much from the bigger companies. Expect it from the smaller companies who are already doing it, making new copies of these older games that we cherish so much. And just hope that they keep growing so that they can keep doing what we're loving, but just on an even bigger scale. Or maybe so that new companies jump into things and help out so that it's not all on one company. However you want to look at it, just so long as copies of these older games continue to get made. But with all of that said, what are your hopes and dreams for the production of older games in this day and age? Do you like some of the companies that are doing it right now? Or maybe you have some problems with how they handle certain things or their different strategies? I don't know. I'd be curious to hear what you have to say, so be sure to leave a response down below, and I will see ya in the next video.
He's the